It's time now for us to invite our own homeboy, because the keynote speech was made by someone we invited to join us. But today we're going to ask our own brother as well to come forward. It is therefore my pleasure to now invite the guest speaker, Dr. Mansour Mukhtar.
Dr. Mansour Mukhtar. Dr. Mansour Mukhtar is a Nigerian economist who was appointed Minister of Finance in the cabinet of President Umaru Yar'Adua on 17th December 2008. Mansour Mukhtar was a special advisor to the Minister of Agriculture and Natural Resources from 1990 to 1992. He worked at the World Bank in various roles. He was a Deputy General Manager at the United Bank for Africa from July 2000 to March 2001, and later was Executive Director at African Development Bank in Tunis. Dr. Mansour Mukhtar was the Executive Director of the World Bank from 2011 to 2014. In 2014, he moved to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, where he became Vice President of Country Operations of the Islamic Development Bank. He has a PhD in economics from the University of Sussex, Brighton.
Thank you very much for that presentation, and I would like to really say how delighted and honored I am to be on this platform, along with other distinguished personalities, Donald Kaberuka and lots of other panelists. I'm also happy to see here the presence of the Permanent Secretary Finance, who is also our IS governor, who is on the board of governors of the Islamic Development Bank, as well as Alhaji Umaru Mutallab, I guess a doyen of banking, father of Islamic banking in Nigeria, and an elder statesman. And I acknowledge the presence of many other distinguished guests. I've been asked to speak about, to speak around this theme of today. And basically, I've tried to order my presentation by first setting the context and taking as a starting point the year 2015. And I'll explain why I'm taking 2015 as the starting point. I'll then continue with a discussion of the roles of medium, small, micro, small, and medium enterprises in economic development and sustainable growth. We zero in on the constraints that these firms face, the key development challenges, and in that context, we single out financing as the most critical of these, and we proceed to explore the opportunities and challenges for addressing this financing challenge. So 2015, why 2015? 2015, a year of change. What's so special about that year for us Nigerians and for Africans, for the global community indeed? So this is not a paid political advert. It's just a statement of fact that in 2015, Nigerians voted for change. Change that would help realize Nigeria's full economic potential, provide jobs and prosperity, as well as promote social inclusion. That's a tall agenda. That's a big promise that the government has to fulfill. So we have to think about how it's going to fulfill this promise. There have been rising expectations. And of course, now we have taken it to the next level with the elections that have taken place recently. The renewed mandate has given an opportunity, but the government has also indicated that it will still focus on these same priorities. Now, the other thing significant about the year 2015 is that Nigeria joined other world leaders in adopting the Sustainable Development Goals. And what are these Sustainable Development Goals? They're really a call for universal action to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure that people enjoy peace and prosperity. It marked a transition. The year, again, marked a transition from Millennium Development Goals, which many of you are familiar with, to Sustainable Development Goals. And this was really a major transition. It's a major change in the way we look at development. We are talking about more ambitious and more bold and ambitious agenda than anything that we have contemplated in the past. 17 goals, a holistic approach looking at things from the social, economic, and environmental perspective, applicable to both countries, and looking at how these link together, but also a commitment to leaving no one behind. So that basically, how do we get to the SDGs? How does the government, what is the stairway to the next level, so to say? And here, this is where the main theme of today's discussion becomes significant. It's widely acknowledged that micro, small, and medium enterprises have a leading role to play in achieving SDGs, and of course, in taking Nigeria to the next level. And through various avenues, we've talked about being economic growth drivers, and I'll elaborate on that, job creators, promoting poverty reduction, social inclusion, and the provision of public goods and services, among other things. So why do we think SMEs should lead the way? As I said, they have been shown to be major economic powerhouse, stimulating growth in many countries. They make up about 90% of all the companies, and in Africa, they're responsible for 45% of the GDP. In Nigeria, it's higher. It's close to 50%. In terms of the job creation potential, we're talking about firms, micro, small, and medium enterprises that account for 80% of total employment, and that really hold promise in terms of exploiting the youth bulge, the demographic transition that Africa is going through. But they are also promoters of poverty alleviation and social inclusion. We know that 1/3 of SMEs around the world are owned by women. And this is a major instrument of social inclusion. They cut across economic sectors. They cut across geographical space. So you can have SMI development in any part of the country. And they are key drivers of innovation, as well as playing an increasingly important role in the provision of public goods, health, sanitation, and education, especially with the growing urbanization. So just to really align with the SDGs, here I've selected some of the Sustainable Development Goals, and any of which will basically, you could easily see the link with MSMEs. Ending poverty, we've talked about zero hunger, the agribusiness enterprises, the good health and well-being, SDG 5, gender equality, promoting inclusive and social economic growth and employment, decent work, improving sustainable industrialization, and helping reduce income inequalities. All of these make MSMEs worthy of specific focus. And that's recognized by the global community to the extent that they have now set 27th June of every year as MSME Celebrating Day, MSME Day across the globe. And here I have a few quotes from various personalities about how important these are in driving growth, in transforming economies, and in really providing the much needed skills and jobs. And if we come closer to home, here our Amina Mohammed basically commenting on the micro, small, and medium enterprises as the major source for creating the 600 million new jobs needed by 2030 to keep pace with the growth of working age population. Another thing from Young Tad. And I think that basically we have talked about this, but at the same time now we begin to wonder, why isn't MMSA playing the role it deserves in many of our economies? In Africa, in Nigeria, and other countries in emerging markets. There are several reasons. We've talked about, now try to look at the binding constraints, the key constraints. And again, we've all acknowledged, and I think it's been said earlier, that limited access to finance constitutes the most binding constraint to MSME development across Africa, and particularly in Nigeria. And basically, we have 70% of SMEs in emerging markets not having access to finance. This is largely because of the perceived high risk and the transaction costs that make it difficult for commercial banks to deal with these institutions. Now, the second area, again, which is focused on this morning, infrastructure deficit. Here, particularly electricity, roads, network, water supply, etc., all of which increase the cost of doing business. And again, in addition to that, there is the soft infrastructure side in terms of the manpower availability in the sector, training, technical and vocational education requirements. The third important area is the enabling environment that we have to contend with. Many businesses are operating in non-conducive environments. As we said, there are lots of, first of all, the absence of suitable legal, regulatory, and institutional arrangements that will facilitate access and growth of MSMEs is very prevalent. In addition to that, in fact, there are unfair regulations, bureaucratic bottlenecks, and unfair taxes that are levied on MSEs across the world to really impede their ability to contribute to the development of the various countries. And again, I move on to the capacity issue. I already alluded to it earlier in terms of this is more from the demand side, if you like, in terms of the limited manpower and capacity needed to drive the transformation of these SMEs. So what are the key imperatives? What do we need to do if we want to improve financing? If we acknowledge that that is the key development constraint. First and foremost, I think we need to develop supportive legal and regulatory framework. And again, I've made reference to that as an important prerequisite for basically addressing some of the key challenges that they face. In addition to that, we need to strengthen financial information infrastructure. So credit information, credit bureaus and registries are very critical in really mitigating or really introducing transparency and facilitating due diligence of SMEs by various people who want to put in money. And again, I want to emphasize the need to design effective government support mechanisms. These have been flourishing. Let me go back to this. Designing effective government support mechanisms. And here, there's been a lot that's happening. I will really elaborate further on this, especially in the light of the discussions we held yesterday at dinner, very animated and lively in relation to these schemes. Yes, certainly many governments, Nigerian government in particular, over the years has sought to promote small and medium enterprises through various government-supported interventions. And this is a commonplace occurrence in other countries also, and much of it takes the form of direct lending, lines of credit, co-financing, even imposition of quotas on bank lending to SMEs, public credit guarantee schemes, among other things. Now, in addition, now we're seeing the more innovative arrangements with the Development Bank of Nigeria, where they are doing wholesale lending to commercial banks and offering partial credit guarantees. Now, some of these, if we look at across the globe or across Africa, certainly there have been some success. Some of these have been successful in alleviating poverty and supporting SME growth. But I think much more needs to be done to evaluate the impact of these interventions. And here, again, I'm talking about looking at them from the cost effectiveness perspective, from the targeting aspect, whether they're being targeted properly or they're being politically captured, from the sustainability dimension, how sustainable are they? And scalable, are they scalable? Do they allow us to go to the next level? What about the synergy and complementarity with other existing initiatives? Are they government schemes complementing this or substituting this? What lessons can we learn from leveraging these finances from multilateral institutions, from the private sector where there's a pool of resources? What is the additionality of these institutions in terms of the value added? So these are all things that we need to reflect on, and we need to be to help us in carefully designing effective intervention strategies. And some of these, of course, could benefit from experimentation and drawing on best practices, which could be domesticated and contextualized to suit Nigeria-specific circumstances. But also, we need to have a systematic and rigorous impact evaluation. We need to know that we're moving in the right direction, that we are delivering results, that we desire to do. So that, in a sense, was we had an animated discussion there, but when I went back to reflect on our discussions, I just thought about, I don't know much about what's happening here. I don't have the specifics, but I'm just talking about the general principles that we need to factor in if we want to ensure that these government interventions are successful. The other point I want to make is how we broaden the range of financing instruments. I think that we've relied too much on traditional collateral-based lending. And there are lots of possibilities. Equity, there's equity funds out there that we could tap into to really help increase the pool of resources available to these medium enterprises, small and medium enterprises. We're not doing enough of that. We're not doing enough of other financing, trade financing, leasing. We're not doing enough of tapping into venture capital opportunities. We're not doing enough into tapping into crowdfunding facilities also. So I think there are lots of things that we need to do. And I think that if you permit me, I want to also say that this is not a paid advert. I want to advocate for Islamic finance as a tool, as a vehicle for increasing the flow of resources to SMEs. And there, I'm working with the Islamic Development Bank. We've seen the potential in many of our countries in terms of really the principles itself, the underlying principles, support to real sector, focus on inclusion and increasing access. But of course, that has to be complemented with other measures. Again, I think one of the key areas is to facilitate, to address capacity building, training, and awareness. Even if you provide financing, you need to be able to access it. The firms need to be out of these financing. They need to be able to prepare bankable projects that would be subject to the test of our bankers. And they will need to also be able to have training, mentoring, and incubation arrangements that will allow them to grow and nurture. The sixth point I want to talk about is trade facilitation and value chain integration. I think we need to encourage that, and I think Donald Kaberuka made the reference to that, especially with the African Continental Trade Free Agreement. Basically, we need to look at how we could encourage these SMEs to really be integrated into value chains at local, regional, and global levels to stimulate growth, to also enable them to get the technological innovation and resources and expertise needed to continue to grow. The other area of importance is leveraging and partnerships. We've talked about government. There's a limit to what the government can do in terms of resource availability. There's a huge pool of resources out there from the private sector that could be tapped into to increase availability of funding for this. There are also lots of development actors. The World Bank, the African Development Bank have come together to talk about basically to assist in getting this right. So this basically moving on now to, these are just some of the key issues that we need to focus on if we're looking at financing. Now, just to recap, I just want to talk about some of the other issues, the big picture, the building blocks of an ecosystem for micro, small, and medium enterprises development. Just to give you an indication that this requires a very holistic and integrated vision, a vision that starts basically that has to be well articulated with a credible strategy. Then we need leadership and political commitment to drive that, to drive the implementation of these. And beyond that, there are other facilitating factors, including legal and regulatory framework that has been referred to, security, political stability, and effective policies, including macroeconomic policies, growth policies, non-market distorting policies are very crucial for the growth of this. We need to leverage technology. We need to build execution capacity, support physical infrastructure, human development, business climate. Of course, we've recorded some significant improvement in many African countries, but we need to do more of that. And of course, we can't forget about partnerships, effective institutions, good governance. And I want to also stress how important security and political stability is to getting this right. So it's a lot of work, and you can see that from this, it really requires a broader, holistic approach. But I want to also close by really acknowledging DBN's achievements since inception in terms of providing a new model for supporting micro, small, and medium enterprises. And I think Donald Kaberuka has mentioned that the basic principles really that are market conforming, and that really also, I think most importantly, the support that is being given, the capacity building support that is being used to complement the various services. The apps that you have provided will go a long way in facilitating the growth of MSMEs. And I want to wish you all the best in this endeavor. Thank you very much.